Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. Alright, so it's 6 a.m. and I wake up to this absolute madness, like the world's gone off the rails before I've even had my coffee. I was dead asleep in my mom's apartment when the screams hit me, sharp, raw, and way too close, echoing through the hallway outside. Not just one scream either, but a whole mess of them, piling on top of each other like a crowd losing its mind. I rolled out of bed, my head still fuzzy, feet clumsy as I shuffled across the room. The air felt off, stale, heavy, and I made my way to the living room, the carpet rough under my toes. I yanked open the sliding door to the balcony, the handle cold in my grip, and stepped out into the early morning chill. Leaning over the railing, I squinted down at the street below, and what I saw made my gut twist. People were going at each other, not fighting, but attacking. Their bodies jerked and twisted in ways that didn't make sense, like their bones were bending wrong. I could see their skin stretched tight, almost shiny, with these faint blue veins pulsing underneath, glowing just enough to catch my eye. Their eyes were messed up, bloodshot with this sickly yellow tint, darting around like they were starving for something to sink their teeth into. Then came the shrieks, guttural, deep, not even close to human. The sound hit me like a punch, rattling around in my skull as I gripped the railing tighter, my knuckles turning white. Down the street, a police cruiser came tearing through, sirens screaming, lights flashing red and blue in the dawn haze. I watched it swerve, tires squealing, and for a second I thought, okay, they'll handle this. But then the cop driving, he just lost it. His head snapped back, body shaking like he was having a seizure, and he lunged at the guy next to him. The car veered hard, slamming into a bus stop with this awful crunch, metal folding in on itself, glass spraying everywhere. Flames shot up from the hood almost instantly, crackling and popping, lighting up the street in this flickering orange glow. The chaos down there just kept growing, shadows dancing in the firelight as more of those shrieks filled the air. I stumbled back inside, my breath shallow, and slid the balcony door shut with a shaky hand. The screams from the hallway were louder now, closer, bouncing off the walls like they were right outside. I stood there, frozen for a second, just listening to the madness creeping in. That's when I felt the building shift, not like an earthquake, but something deliberate. A heavy thud rolled through the floor, vibrating up my legs, and I knew it was the security doors slamming shut. Later, I heard about Darius, our night shift security guy. He was wrapping up his shift when it all went down. Picture this. He's in the lobby, probably dragging his feet after pulling an all-nighter, when the building manager, this wiry dude who's always barking about rent, came at him out of nowhere. Darius said the guy's jaw dropped open, way too wide, like a snake about to swallow something whole, and he lunged with this crazy strength. Darius barely had time to react. He grabbed his tactical flashlight off his belt, the one he always carries, and swung it hard. Caught the manager square in the face, but the guy kept coming, hands clawing, until Darius shoved him back and hit him again. Darius was rattled, hands trembling, sweat beading on his forehead, as he stumbled to the security desk. He fumbled with his tablet, fingers slipping on the screen, until he punched in the lockdown code. That's what I felt. The doors sealing us in with that deep, final thud. He told me later how it echoed through the lobby, the sound bouncing off the tile walls, and for a second, he just stood there, chest heaving, staring at the manager's body twitching on the floor. Back in the apartment, I was still catching my breath, staring out at the street where the cruiser's flames were climbing higher, the crackle of burning metal cutting through the shrieks. So it's probably around 7 a.m. now, maybe a little later, and I'm thinking I've got to get up to my mom's place on the 32nd floor, see if she's okay in all this mess. I was still in the kitchen, that cheap knife clutched in my sweaty hand, when I decided I couldn't just sit there waiting for whatever was out in the hallway to come busting through. The screams had died down a little, but the silence felt worse, like the calm before something awful. I grabbed my jacket from the couch, the one with the frayed cuffs my mom's always nagging me to replace, and slipped on my sneakers, laces still untied. The plan was simple. Get to the elevator, ride up to 32, check on her. I cracked the front door open just an inch and peeked out. The hallway was empty, but the air smelled wrong, metallic like blood, mixed with something sour. I stepped out, easing the door shut behind me so it wouldn't click too loud, and made a beeline for the elevator. When I got there, I jabbed the button, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The little light above the doors stayed dark, and I could hear this faint hum, like the power was cut. My stomach sank. Stairs it was then. I pushed through the stairwell door, the hinges creaking loud enough to make me wince, and stepped into this dim, shadowy mess. The emergency lights were on, these flickering red bulbs bolted to the walls, casting long, jagged shadows that stretched across the concrete steps. Every footstep echoed. Mine sounded too loud, too clumsy, and I kept my hand on the railing, the metal cool and gritty under my palm. I'd made it maybe 2 flights up when I heard this voice. A girl, young, muttering to herself. I rounded the corner and there she was, this teenager, maybe 16, huddled against the wall. She was clutching her smartphone, the screen glowing faintly as she tapped at it, her thumb moving fast like she was begging it to work. Her hair was a tangled mess, dark strands sticking to her sweaty forehead, and her eyes flicked up to me, wide and scared. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low. "You okay?" She nodded, barely, and stood up, shoving the phone into her pocket. "I'm Eliza," she said, her words tumbling out quick. "I'm trying to get downstairs. My parents are on the ground floor. No signal, though. You?" "Heading up," I told her, nodding toward the stairs. "My mom's on 32. Elevators are dead." She hesitated, then fell in step beside me, her sneakers scuffing the steps. "Guess we're stuck together for now," she said, forcing a shaky laugh. We started down instead. She figured she'd try for her parents, and I'd tag along until we hit a split. The stairwell was quiet at first, just our breathing and the faint buzz of those emergency lights. Then from below came this sound, wet, slapping footsteps, like someone dragging soaked boots across the floor. My heart kicked up a notch, and I stopped, grabbing Eliza's arm. "You hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, her face paling. We peered over the railing, and that's when they came into view, 2 of them, climbing the stairs fast. Residents, I think, from their clothes, one in a ripped hoodie, the other in what looked like pajama pants. But they weren't people anymore. Their movements were all wrong, jerky but quick, like puppets on speed. The one in front, his throat was torn open, this jagged gash leaking black fluid that pulsed out with every step, dripping onto the concrete with these soft, sickening plops. His head twitched side to side, those yellowed eyes scanning upward, locking onto us. The other one let out a shriek, sharp and ragged, and they both charged. Eliza yelped, stumbling back, and I raised that useless knife, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold it. Before they reached us, the stairwell door above slammed open with a bang, and this figure burst through. Darius, the security guy from earlier. He was wielding a fire axe, the red handle chipped and scratched, and he moved like he'd done this 100 times. He swung hard, catching the first infected square in the chest. The blade sank in with a wet crunch, and black fluid sprayed across the wall, splattering the emergency light so it flickered even worse. The second one lunged at him, but he sidestepped, bringing the axe down on its neck, clean, precise, like chopping wood. It collapsed, twitching, and Darius stood there, breathing hard, the axe dripping in his hands. "You two all right?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. Eliza nodded, still pressed against the wall, and I managed a weak, "Yeah, thanks." He jerked his head toward the door. "Come on, security office, safer there." We followed him down a couple flights, the stairs slick under my feet from that black gunk, until we pushed through another door into this cramped little room lit by a single desk lamp. Monitors lined one wall, flickering with grainy footage of the building, and a metal safe sat open in the corner. Darius set the axe down, the blade clanging against the desk, and pulled a 9mm handgun from the safe, popping the clip out to check it. I watched him move, all smooth and deliberate, and couldn't help myself. "Are you military?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He glanced up, his jaw tight, and gave a short nod. "Afghanistan, 2 tours," he said, clicking the clip back in. "Never thought I'd see combat again, especially not here." His voice was clipped like he didn't want to dwell on it, and he turned back to the gun, running his thumb over the grip. I just stood there, catching my breath, the hum of the monitors filling the silence. Later, I found out about Noah. This guy stuck on the 28th floor. He was holed up with his ex-wife, Claire, and their little girl, trying to keep things calm. He'd been pacing their apartment, sweat soaking through his shirt, when he noticed his daughter's forehead getting hot. She was curled up on the couch, whining softly, and he brushed her hair back, feeling that fever kick in. Then his arm started burning, this bite he'd gotten earlier, some run-in he didn't want to talk about. He rolled up his sleeve, and there it was, red, angry, with dark veins spidering out from the wound, creeping up his skin like ink. Claire walked in, carrying a glass of water, and froze when she saw it. Her eyes went huge, terrified, and she set the glass down so hard it sloshed onto the table. "You brought this into our home?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she backed away, pulling their daughter close. Noah reached out, desperate. "Claire, please, I can explain," he said, his words thick with panic, but she wasn't hearing it. She scooped the kid up and bolted for the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I could hear it from down the hall, the heavy scrape of a dresser being dragged across the floor, shoved against the door to keep him out. Noah stumbled out into the hallway, alone now, his breath ragged. The fire in his arm was spreading, this searing heat pulsing through his veins, and he leaned against the wall, sweat dripping off his chin onto the carpet. Every step was a fight, his legs shaky as he moved through the abandoned corridors, doors left ajar, lights flickering overhead. Whatever was happening to him, he wasn't giving up yet, but you could tell he was scared out of his mind. Back in the security office, I glanced at Eliza, who was fiddling with her phone again, and then at Darius, who was wiping the axe blade with a rag. So, it's probably pushing 10 a.m. now, maybe closer to noon, and I'm still holed up in this tiny security office with Darius and Eliza, trying to make sense of what's happening. I was slouched against the desk, my legs aching from all that running around earlier, just staring at the bank of monitors flickering in front of us. The screens were like windows into hell. Every one showed a different slice of the building going to pieces. I couldn't look away from this one feed, down in the parking garage. There was this old guy, white hair, hunched over, probably someone's grandpa, shuffling toward his car, keys jingling in his shaky hand. Then out of the shadows, 3 of those infected came at him, fast and silent. Their hands clawed into him, tearing at his coat, his arms, his face. His screams were high-pitched, desperate, bouncing off the concrete walls, until one of them ripped into his chest, and it just stopped. Blood pooled under him, dark and shiny under the fluorescent lights, and I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep my knees from buckling. Then another screen caught my eye. This woman, maybe in her 30s, sitting cross-legged on an apartment floor. She was cradling this kid, a little boy with messy hair, rocking him back and forth like she was trying to soothe him. She didn't see it coming, didn't notice how his head twitched, how his little hands clenched into fists. Then he lunged, teeth sinking into her throat, and this spray of crimson hit the wall behind her. She screamed, flailing, trying to push him off, but he was too strong, too fast. The feed cut out after that, just static, and I turned away, my stomach churning. Darius was pacing behind me, his boots thudding on the tile floor, while Eliza sat in the corner, knees pulled up, staring at her phone like it might save us. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The pieces were clicking together in my head, and it was making me sick. "Those symptoms," I said, my voice coming out rough, hollow. "The convulsions, the way they're moving, that blue discoloration under their skin. It's NR27. I sank into the chair by the desk, running my hands through my hair. I worked at Helix Genomics. It was my project, supposed to repair neural pathways, help people with stuff like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. We never meant for this. Eliza's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Wait, you're saying you made this?" Her voice was sharp, accusing, and I didn't blame her. I shook my head, trying to find the words. "Not like this. It was supposed to heal people, not turn them into monsters." Darius stopped pacing, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, just listening. Eliza didn't let it go. She fumbled with her phone, her hands trembling so bad she almost dropped it, and pulled up this video. "Look at this," she said, shoving the screen toward me. The footage was shaky, like she'd filmed it from a hiding spot. Unmarked military trucks rolling up to Helix at night, their engines rumbling low. Guys in hazmat suits climbed out, unloading these metal containers, and even through the grainy video, I could see the faint blue glow from the canisters they were hauling inside. My throat went dry as I spotted the equipment. Big, bulky machines with digital displays, the kind my team never had access to. "Those aren't ours," I whispered, leaning closer to the screen, my fingers brushing the edge of her phone. "That's military-grade bioweapons tech. We didn't have anything like that. Who the hell authorized this?" Darius grunted, pushing off the wall. "Doesn't matter now, it's here." He went back to wiping down that fire axe, the rag scraping against the blade, but I could tell he was rattled too. Eliza just stared at me, her jaw tight, like she wasn't sure whether to trust me or scream. Before I could say anything else, there was this heavy thud against the door, someone collapsing against it, hard. I jumped up, the chair scraping back, and Darius grabbed his handgun off the desk, leveling it as the door creaked open. It was Noah, the guy from the 28th floor. He hit the ground right inside the doorway, his knees buckling, and I could see he was in bad shape. His skin was pale, almost gray, with those blue veins snaking up his arms, glowing faintly under the sweat-soaked shirt clinging to him. His eyes, though, they were still clear, still him, even with the fever burning through him. "My daughter," he gasped, his voice ragged, barely audible. "She's sick too. I couldn't save her." He slumped against the doorframe, one hand clutching his arm where that bite mark was festering, the skin around it black and swollen. Darius lowered the gun a little, but his grip stayed tight. "You're infected," he said, flat out, like he was ready to end it right there. Noah nodded, wincing as he shifted his weight. "Yeah, I know. Do what you gotta do." His chest heaved, every breath a struggle, and I could see the fear in his face. He thought this was it, but something clicked for me, and I stepped forward, holding up a hand to stop Darius. "Wait," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "He's not like the others. Look at him. He's still talking, still thinking." I grabbed a pack of zip ties from the desk drawer, left over from some repair job probably, and knelt beside Noah. "The infection usually takes over in an hour," I said, looping the ties around his wrists, pulling them snug but not too tight. "Full conversion, mindless, aggressive, the works. You've been fighting it for what, nearly 4 hours now?" I secured his arms to the chair we dragged over, the plastic creaking as he settled into it. "Whatever's happening inside you, it's different. It might be our only clue to figure this out." Noah's head lolled back, his breath shallow, but he managed a weak nod. "Just keep her safe," he muttered, talking about his daughter, I guess. I stood up, brushing my hands on my jeans, and glanced at the monitors again. The chaos wasn't slowing down. Those infected were everywhere, and now we had Noah tied up in here, a ticking clock we didn't understand yet. Eliza slid her phone back into her pocket, her hands still shaky, and Darius set the gun down, leaning over to check the ammo clip again, like he needed something to do. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth I'd just spilled was only the start of something way uglier. So, it's gotta be past noon now, maybe pushing 2 p.m., and the day's starting to feel like it's dragging on forever in this cramped little security office. I was still standing near Noah, who was slumped in that chair, his wrists chafing against the zip ties every time he shifted. The monitors were still buzzing, throwing their grainy light across the room, and I couldn't stop glancing at them, like I was waiting for something worse to pop up. That's when one of the feeds caught my eye. Some guy in a bathrobe, stumbling around his apartment on the 15th floor. He looked normal, tired maybe, pouring himself a glass of water from the sink. I watched him tilt his head back, take a long gulp, and then, bam! He dropped the glass. It shattered on the tile, water splashing everywhere, and he started shaking, his whole body jerking like he'd been hit with a taser. His hands clawed at his face, veins popping blue under his skin, and in less than a minute, he was one of them, snarling, twitching, gone. I spun around to the others, my voice catching. "Did you see that?" Eliza looked up from her spot on the floor, her eyes bleary, and Darius stepped closer, squinting at the screen. Another feed showed the same thing, a woman in the laundry room, sipping from a bottle she'd filled at the tap. Same deal, convulsions, blue veins, transformation, all in record time. That's not normal, I said, my hands balling into fists. The infection, it takes hours, not minutes. Something's wrong. Darius leaned over the desk, rewinding one of the clips with a quick tap on the controls, and we watched it again, frame by frame. Water, he muttered, pointing at the screen. They drank the tap water. My stomach dropped like a rock. The building's supply, it's contaminated, I said, pacing a tight circle in the room, my sneakers squeaking on the tile. That's why it's speeding up. This happened hours ago, and we're just seeing it now. Darius straightened up, his jaw tight, and started cleaning his Glock, pulling a rag from his pocket, wiping down the barrel with these quick practice strokes. This wasn't accidental, he said, his voice low, steady. Someone wanted maximum casualties. Flood the water, hit everyone at once. He clicked the slide back, checking the chamber, and I could hear the faint scrape of metal on metal. We couldn't just sit there anymore. Supplies were running low, and we needed answers. Darius grabbed his axe again, slinging it over his shoulder, and nodded at Eliza. You're with me, he told her. We're scavenging, apartments, basement, anywhere we can find something useful. She hesitated, then stood up, brushing dust off her jeans, and followed him out. I stayed behind with Noah, keeping an eye on him as he drifted in and out, his breathing shallow but steady. They came back maybe an hour later, Darius kicking the door open with his boot, Eliza trailing behind him, her face pale. You need to see this, he said, dropping a duffel bag of canned food and batteries onto the floor with a thud. Basement. Hidden room. I followed them down, the stairwell colder now, the air damp and heavy. We wound our way past the parking garage level, down to the maintenance corridors, dark, narrow, with pipes hissing overhead. Darius led us to this rusted metal door tucked behind a stack of crates. He shoved it open, the hinges groaning, and flicked on his flashlight. Inside was this comms room, high-tech, military-grade stuff that didn't belong in a random apartment building. Consoles lined the walls, screens blinking with static, and a headset dangled from a hook, swaying slightly. There was a direct line to Helix Genomics, logo stamped on the equipment, unmistakable. Eliza plugged her phone into one of the ports, her fingers fumbling with the cable, and pulled up security footage from the facility. My breath caught when I saw it, me, on screen, walking into Helix the night before the outbreak. I was carrying a satchel, punching in a code at the lab entrance, my face clear under the harsh lights. Darius turned on me, slow, deliberate, raising that Glock until the barrel was level with my chest. Explain, he said, his voice like ice. Eliza's eyes went wide, her phone slipping from her hand to clatter on the concrete floor. I stumbled back, my hands up, my heart hammering so loud I could feel it in my throat. I didn't lie, I said, my words shaking. I didn't just work at Helix. I created NR-27. It was for my mom, Alzheimer's. My voice broke, cracking hard, and I could feel tears burning down my cheeks. Then I found out they had military contracts, wanted to weaponize it. I couldn't let that happen. I tried to destroy my work, sabotage the samples, everything. Eliza stepped forward, her fists clenched. You caused this? She screamed, her voice bouncing off the walls, raw and furious. Her phone skidded a little further across the floor, the screen still glowing faintly. I shook my head, wiping at my face with my sleeve, trying to steady myself. I tried to prevent it, I shot back, my voice rising. I wrecked the batches, but someone, they must have gotten in after me, changed the formula. This isn't my creation anymore. It's been twisted, weaponized. I didn't want this. Darius didn't lower the gun right away. His eyes bored into me, searching, and I could hear the faint click of his finger easing off the trigger guard. The room went quiet, just the hum of the equipment and Eliza's ragged breathing. Noah was still upstairs, tied to that chair, and now this. Proof I'd been at the heart of it all. The weight of it hit me like a truck, and I sank against the wall, my legs shaky, wondering how the hell we were going to get out of this one. So it's probably creeping toward 4 p.m. now, maybe later, and the air in this building's starting to feel like it's closing in on us. I was still reeling from that moment in the comms room, my back against the cold concrete wall, when Darius made the call. We're splitting up, he said, holstering his Glock with a quick snap. His voice was firm, but I could see the cracks. His hands weren't as steady as before. Eliza and I are heading to the roof, gonna try signaling for help. You, he jabbed a finger at me, stay with Noah. Figure out what's keeping him ticking. We need something, anything to fight this. Eliza nodded, scooping her phone off the floor, her movements jerky like she was running on fumes. I didn't argue. Didn't have it in me. They grabbed the duffel bag of supplies and headed out, their footsteps echoing down the corridor until the stairwell door clanged shut behind them. I trudged back up to the security office, my legs heavy, the air thick with that sour, metallic stink that wouldn't go away. Noah was still there, tied to the chair, his head slumped forward. Sweat glistened on his forehead, dripping onto his lap, and his breathing was shallow, labored. I dropped into the seat across from him, my hands fidgeting with the edge of the desk, trying to think straight. "We're gonna figure this out," I said, more to myself than him. "My mom's meds. Maybe there's something there." He lifted his head, slow, his eyes glassy but sharp. "I feel hot," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper, "like I'm burning up." I leaned closer, peering at his arms. The blue veins were brighter now, pulsing under his pale skin, but he wasn't thrashing or snarling like the others. Then with this low groan, he flexed his hands, and the zip ties, those tough plastic ones, snapped like they were nothing. The pieces clattered to the floor, and I jolted back, my chair scraping loud against the tile. "Noah," I started, my heart pounding, but he just sat there, palms up, staring at them like he couldn't believe it either. "I can hear them," he whispered, his eyes going wide, a mix of fear and awe flickering across his face. "In my head, like whispers, all of them out there, but I'm still me." His voice trembled, and he looked at me, pleading almost, like he needed me to tell him he wasn't slipping away. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "Hold on," I said, standing up so fast the chair tipped back. "Don't move, I've got an idea." I started digging through my bag, laptop, notes, stuff I'd grabbed from my place earlier. My mom's been on this experimental drug, Nurex, for her Alzheimer's. Little white pills she keeps in a bottle by her sink. I'd seen the charts, the trials. "The Nurex," I said, pacing now, my sneakers thudding on the floor as I talked it out. "It binds to the same receptors NR27 hits. Maybe it's messing with the pathogen, slowing down the part that fries your brain, but letting the physical stuff kick in." Noah frowned, flexing his fingers again, testing it. "Stronger," he muttered. "I can feel everything. The air, the sounds. It's loud." I grabbed a pen off the desk, scribbling on a scrap of paper, my hand shaky but moving fast. "If it's suppressing the worst of it, we might have something here," I said, glancing at him. "A way to keep you. He nodded, slow, but there was this flicker of hope in his eyes, faint but real. Meanwhile, up on the roof, I got this part later from Eliza. Darius and her were fighting against the wind whipping across the building. The door to the rooftop banged shut behind them, and they crouched low, ducking behind an air conditioning unit rusted from years of rain. Darius pulled out these tactical binoculars from his pack, the lenses scratched but functional, and scanned the skyline. The city was a mess, smoke curling up in thick black plumes, distant booms rattling the air. Then he froze, his grip tightening. "Helicopters," he said, his voice low, a tremor slipping through. Eliza peeked over his shoulder as he adjusted the focus, and they saw them. Military choppers circling slow over the streets, blades chopping through the haze. Down below, soldiers in hazmat suits moved in teams, their boots kicking up dust, but they weren't helping anyone. Darius tracked one group through the binoculars, saw them corner a woman waving her arms, begging for rescue. One soldier raised a rifle, and with a muzzle flash, she dropped, limp. No hesitation. Further out, firebombs rained down, orange streaks slicing through the sky before whole blocks erupted in flames, section by section. "They're sterilizing the area," Darius muttered, lowering the binoculars, his hands trembling just enough for Eliza to notice. "No witnesses, no evidence." His voice wasn't steady anymore. It cracked like the weight of it was finally hitting him. Eliza clutched her phone tighter, her knuckles white, and whispered, "What do we do now?" Darius didn't answer right away, just stared out at the burning city, the chopper's hum growing louder, closer. Back in the office, I was still scribbling, my pen scratching across the paper as Noah sat there, flexing his hands, testing his strength. The monitors flickered behind us, showing more chaos, more fire, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Darius and Eliza were seeing up there, it was going to change everything. So, it's getting dark now, probably around 6 p.m., maybe 7, and night's falling fast, turning this whole mess into something straight out of a nightmare. I was still in the security office, hunched over my scribbled notes, when Darius and Eliza came barreling back in, the door banging against the wall. Darius's face was tight, his jaw clenched, and Eliza looked like she'd seen a ghost, her hands trembling as she clutched that duffel bag. "We've got no time," Darius said, his voice sharp, cutting through the hum of the monitors. "Military's closing in, choppers, firebombs, the works. We need to move." I straightened up, my back stiff from sitting too long, and glanced at Noah, who was flexing his hands again, his breathing steadier now. "My mom's apartment," I said, grabbing my jacket off the desk. 32nd floor. She's got Nurex, pills. If it's helping Noah, it might help us. Then we hit the basement parking garage. Get out before they lock this place down. Darius nodded, already checking his Glock, his fingers moving fast. "Let's go," he said, and we filed out, Noah staggering to his feet behind me, his steps heavier than before. The stairwell door creaked as I pushed it open, and the air hit me. Cold, damp, thick with that metallic tang that clung to everything now. We started climbing, Darius in front, his boots thudding on the concrete steps, me and Eliza in the middle, Noah bringing up the rear. The emergency lights were dimmer now, flickering like they were about to give out, casting these long, shifting shadows that made every corner look alive. It didn't take long to realize the stairwells weren't safe anymore. They'd turned into hunting grounds. We were maybe halfway up, around the 20th floor, when we heard them, those wet, slapping footsteps, faster now, more purposeful. Darius raised a hand, signaling us to stop, and I froze, my breath catching as I peeked over the railing. A pack of infected came into view below, moving together, not stumbling but stalking, their heads twitching in sync, like they were listening to something we couldn't hear. "They're coordinated," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Darius didn't reply, just pulled a plastic water bottle and a roll of duct tape from his pack, rigging a makeshift silencer onto his handgun. The tape rasped as he wrapped it tight, his hands steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. We kept moving, slower now, every step a gamble. By the 25th floor they were closer, the shrieks echoing up the stairwell, sharp and hungry. Darius took point, his gun raised, and when one lunged from a landing above, he fired, a soft thwip instead of a bang. The infected dropped, black fluid pooling under its head, and we stepped over it, my sneakers sticking slightly to the mess. But it got worse. On the 29th, we hit a dark hallway, lights out, just the faint glow of Darius's flashlight cutting through the gloom. That's when they came at us hard, a group of them, maybe 6, pouring out of an open apartment door. Darius didn't hesitate. He charged in, swinging the axe with one hand, firing with the other. The first went down quick, the blade crunching into its shoulder, but the rest were on him fast. I saw it then. His strength wasn't normal. He shoved one back, hard enough to send it crashing into the wall, that plaster cracking under the impact. His flashlight beam swung wild, and when it caught his face, his eyes, they glowed this unnatural blue just for a second, matching the veins pulsing under the infected skin. Eliza gasped, stumbling back, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her behind me. The last one fell, Darius's axe buried in its chest, and he stood there, panting, blood, black and red, splattered across his uniform. I stepped forward, my voice shaking. "How long?" I demanded, pointing at his arm where his sleeve had ridden up, revealing blue veins snaking beneath his skin. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, catching his breath, and met my eyes. "Got scratched in the first attack," he said, his tone flat like he was admitting to a parking ticket. "Back in the lobby. Been fighting it off. The pills, your mom's pills. I've been on them for PTSD. They keep me clear, mostly." I stared at him, my mind spinning. Nurex, he'd been taking it too. That's why he was still him, why he was stronger. Before I could process it, the floor shook, more infected coming from below, a whole horde this time. We'd hit the 30th floor, and they were on us, blocking the stairwell ahead, their shrieks deafening in the tight space. Noah pushed past me, his frame bulkier now, his fingers elongated, curling like claws. "Get back," he growled, his voice deeper, rougher. He didn't wait for us to argue. He lunged into them, moving fast, too fast, his hands slamming into the first one, sending it tumbling down the stairs. Then something freaky happened. The others, they froze, their heads twitching, and for a split second it was like he was controlling them. Their eyes locked on him, glowing blue, and they turned away from us, staggering toward the wall like they'd forgotten we were there. Noah kept going, shoving through, buying us time, but they swarmed him, claws tearing into his back. He spun around, locking eyes with me, his own blazing bright blue now, brighter than I'd ever seen. "We're not dying," he gasped, his voice cutting through the chaos, strained but clear. "We're evolving." Then they dragged him down, a mass of limbs and shrieks, and I heard this sickening snap as we bolted past. Darius dragging me by the arm, Eliza's sobs echoing behind us. We didn't stop, just kept climbing, the stairwell blurring around me, Noah's words ringing in my ears as we pushed for the 32nd floor. So, it's got to be close to 9 p.m. now, maybe pushing 10, and we're finally hitting the 32nd floor, bruised and breathless after everything we just went through. I was panting hard, my legs burning as we stumbled out of the stairwell, the air up here cooler but still heavy with that sour metallic stink. Darius was ahead, his axe dangling at his side, dripping black from the last fight, while Eliza trailed behind me, her sneakers scuffing the carpet, her breaths coming out in little hitches. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, doors cracked open, lights flickering overhead, but no screams, no footsteps. I fumbled with my key, my hands sweaty and shaky, and shoved it into the lock of my mom's apartment. The door clicked open, and we slipped inside, Darius easing it shut behind us with a soft thud. The first thing that hit me was the sound. Classical music, soft and lilting, drifting from the old radio on the shelf. Beethoven, maybe, one of her favorites. It was so out of place it made my skin crawl. Then I saw her, my mom, sitting in her armchair by the window, the one with the faded floral pattern she's had forever. She looked wrong. Alive, yeah, but changed. Her fingers were long now, too long, curling over the armrests like spider legs, and her skin, it was almost see-through, this pale, papery thinness that let me see the glowing blue veins pulsing underneath, a whole network lighting her up from within. She sat there, calm as anything, her head tilted slightly, watching us come in. "I knew you'd come back, Olivia," she said, her voice deep, resonant, like it was echoing inside her chest. "You always were stubborn about fixing your mistakes." It wasn't shaky or frail like it'd been lately. This was strong, clear, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped closer, my boots sinking into the thick rug, and just stared at her, my mouth dry. "Mom?" I managed, my voice cracking. What happened to you?" She smiled, small, knowing, and shifted in the chair, the fabric creaking under her weight. "I've been experimenting," she said, reaching for a notebook on the side table, its pages crammed with her neat handwriting. "Those samples you brought home months ago, NR27. I couldn't let them go to waste." She flipped it open, her elongated fingers moving slow, deliberate, and tapped a page. "The pathogen doesn't just reanimate dead tissue, it rebuilds neural pathways, creates a hive mind between the infected. That mindless aggression, it's only the first stage. Those who survive, we transform into something new." Her eyes met mine, sharp and clear, no trace of the Alzheimer's fog I'd gotten used to. Before I could wrap my head around it, the windows started rattling, hard, like something was shaking the whole building. I rushed over, peering through the blinds, and saw them. Military helicopters hovering outside, their blades chopping the air with this low, relentless thrum. Spotlights swept across the facade, beams slicing through the dark, catching the smoke curling up from the city below. Then, faint but growing louder, came the sound of boots, heavy, synchronized, echoing up the stairwell. "They're here," Darius said, his voice low, urgent, as he stepped up beside me, peering out. "Soldiers, they've breached the building." Mom stood then, smooth and graceful in a way she hadn't moved in years, and crossed the room to her kitchen counter. "They can't be allowed to weaponize this," she said, her tone flat, final. She opened a drawer, pulled out a small plastic case, her Nurex pills, and pressed it into my hands, her grip firm, those long fingers cool against my skin. "Take these," she said, her eyes locking on mine. "The basement, there's a maintenance tunnel. Leads to the subway system, built during the Cold War, a contingency the government's long forgotten." She squeezed my hands once, then let go, stepping back. I shook my head, clutching the case, my throat tight. "Mom, come with us." I started, but she cut me off, turning toward the door. "I've lived my life, dear," she said, calm as anything. like she was heading out for groceries. Let me make my final moments count. The classical music swelled behind her, violins rising, and she walked to the door, her silhouette stark against the hallway light as she pulled it open. We didn't have time to argue. Darius grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the closet, her closet, cluttered with old coats and boxes. "There," Eliza said, pointing to a panel in the back, barely visible behind a stack of shoeboxes. We shoved them aside, the cardboard scraping the floor, and I pried the panel loose, my nails digging into the edges. It popped open, revealing a narrow, dusty tunnel, the air inside stale and cold. As we ducked in, me first, then Eliza, Darius last, the sounds hit us. Gunfire, sharp and staccato, cutting through the apartment. Then my mom's voice, not human anymore, but this deep, guttural roar, followed by screams, soldiers yelling, something crashing hard. I crawled faster, the tunnel's metal walls scraping my elbows, the Nurex case rattling in my pocket. Behind us, the chaos faded, swallowed by the dark, and I could hear Eliza's shaky breathing, Darius's steady steps as we pushed deeper, aiming for the basement and whatever chance we had left. So, it's gotta be just before 5 a.m. now. The sky's starting to lighten, and we're finally crawling out of that damn tunnel, half dead but still breathing. The maintenance tunnel spat us out somewhere beyond the building, this narrow exit hidden under a rusted grate near the edge of the quarantine zone. I shoved the grate aside, metal scraping loud against concrete, and climbed out first, my hands gritty with dust. The air hit me, sharp, smoky, tinged with gasoline and ash, and I turned to help Eliza, her hands trembling as she scrambled up behind me. Darius came last, his movements slower now, his breathing rough, his hands, God, they were changing, fingers lengthening into these clawed, bony things, trembling as he pulled himself free. We stood there for a second, catching our breath, the city sprawling out around us in ruins, fires licking up from buildings, smoke choking the horizon, military checkpoints glowing with floodlights at every major crossing. I squinted into the haze and saw something that made my chest tighten, figures moving in the shadows, not soldiers, not the mindless infected, but others like Noah. Coherent, their eyes glowing faint blue, guiding survivors through the wreckage, helping them slip past the patrols. "Look," I whispered, nudging Eliza. She followed my gaze, her jaw dropping a little. They're like him," she said, her voice soft, shaky. Noah wasn't the only one. Darius grunted, leaning against a busted lamppost, his clawed hand flexing. "Evolving," he muttered, echoing Noah's last words. We couldn't stay exposed. Those choppers were still out there, their hum a constant drone overhead. Down the street, I spotted an abandoned Jeep, its driver's door hanging open, keys gone. "Over there," I said, jogging toward it, my boots crunching on broken glass. Darius followed, his steps uneven, and knelt by the steering column. He ripped open a panel with those claws, wires spilling out, and started twisting them together, his hands shaking bad but steady enough to work. Sparks flew, a faint pop sounded, and the engine sputtered to life, rumbling low. "Get in," he said, sliding into the driver's seat, and Eliza and I piled into the back, the seats cold and torn under us. He peeled out, tires squealing on the pavement, weaving through deserted streets littered with overturned cars and smoldering debris. The city blurred past, shattered storefronts, flickering streetlights, the occasional scream cutting through the silence. Eliza fumbled with her phone, her fingers clumsy, and suddenly it lit up, signal bars blinking on. "I've got something," she said, her voice spiking with hope. She tapped the screen, pulling up a news feed, and this robotic anchor voice crackled through. "A terrorist attack has released a highly contagious pathogen. Extreme containment measures underway." I snatched the phone from her, staring at the words, my pulse hammering. "That's their cover," I said, my voice tight. "They're burying it." It hit me then, sitting there in the rattling Jeep, the truth sinking in like a knife. "This wasn't an accident," I said, leaning forward, my hands gripping the seat. "The pathogen, NR-27, it was never meant to make mindless zombies. It was designed to evolve us, push humanity forward. I built it for that, but someone at Helix, they twisted it, turned my work into a bioweapon." My voice shook, anger and guilt mixing together. "These first 24 hours, just the start. It's transforming us, all of us." Eliza stared at me, her eyes wide, and Darius just kept driving, his clawed hands tight on the wheel. We didn't get far before a shadow buzzed overhead, a military drone, its lights blinking red, locking onto us. "Shit," Darius hissed, swerving hard, the Jeep lurching as he tried to lose it. I twisted around, watching it close in, its hum growing sharper. Then Darius did something wild. He reached out the window, his trembling clawed hand stretching toward it, and his eyes flared that unnatural blue. The air crackled like static popping, and the drone jerked mid-flight, its lights stuttering before it spiraled down, smashing into a building with a burst of sparks and glass. "I can feel the electrical currents," he whispered, pulling his hand back, staring at it like it wasn't his anymore. His voice was this mix of wonder and horror, low and unsteady, and he flexed those claws, testing them. I didn't say anything, just sat back, my head spinning, until I felt this warm trickle under my nose. I wiped at it, my fingers coming away red, blood. My heart skipped, and I tilted the rearview mirror toward me, catching my reflection. My eyes, they were starting to glow, faint but there, a soft blue creeping in. "Oh God," I breathed, realization slamming into me. I've been exposed, from the start. Darius didn't stop driving until we hit a hillside just outside the city, the Jeep grinding to a halt in the dirt. We climbed out, legs shaky, and stood there, the three of us, me, Eliza, and a half-transformed Darius, watching the sunrise bleed orange and pink over the burning skyline. Smoke curled up in thick columns, the distant thump of choppers fading as the light grew. I took a deep breath, the Nurex case still rattling in my pocket, and said it out loud, my voice steady despite everything. I survived the first 24 hours of the zombie awakening. But the real question isn't whether humanity will survive this plague. It's whether we're ready for what we're becoming. The wind picked up, tugging at my jacket, and I glanced at Darius, his claws glinting in the dawn. Then at Eliza, her phone clutched tight. We were different now, all of us, and whatever came next, it wasn't going to be clean or simple. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.